It started as just blogging software, so just like journaling, that sort of thing. Then it expanded to run entire websites, and then became like an application platform. So people build all sorts of stuff on it. There's over 60,000 plugins and themes. I think the average WordPress install has like 30 plugins installed.
Oh, wow.
So every WordPress is totally unique. There's no two that are alike. So you can really make it your own. And we have this fun like action and hook system. So plugins can literally change everything about it. So I think that's the advantage. You can kind of get the best of SaaS and running it yourself.
Welcome to The Peel. I'm your host, Sergey Novak, founder of Banana Capital. Today's guest is Matt Mullenweg, co-founder of WordPress, which powers over 43% of all websites on the internet, and founder of Automattic. Our conversation gets into the early days of the company and the decisions and philosophies that set them up for success 20 years later.
We made the bet on Moore's Law, PHP, that everything would be dynamic, and we'd kind of render at runtime, which was very controversial at the time.
We talk about open source software, why Matt's such a big proponent of it, and how Automattic built its business model.
In open source, anyone in the world can take existing software, take all the code, and start a new project.
Automattic was one of the first SaaS companies, and Matt shares what it was like in the mid-2000s.
They didn't have what was called like a one-click install. That was actually an innovation that we helped introduce to the industry. When we raised a little bit of money, I ended up spending most of it just buying servers, like physical servers from Dell.
He shares how to build a community around your product.
If you organized one and got like 100 people to sign up, I would fly anywhere in the world. And so I ended up in some very strange places.
The concept of conscious capitalism.
Building a company in a way that you'd want your children or grandchildren to work there.
Lessons running one of the first distributed teams.
90% of investors I spoke to wouldn't invest in us because we didn't have a headquarters and everyone in an office.
And lessons on optimism from Walt Disney.
It takes far more bravery and courage to be optimistic. I just encourage folks to keep that flame alive, the optimism, the things that sort of like inspire you to build, because you really need that. And I would say one of the hardest things in creative work is keeping that childlike flame alive, because so much of society is sort of almost designed to extinguish it.
A quick reminder, I publish 2 episodes of The Peel every week with a back catalog of 100 episodes exploring the world's greatest startup stories just like this one. Tune in over the next few weeks for conversations with the founders of Handshake and Railway. Before we talk to Matt, I have to tell you about Ramp. If you're running a finance team, you know how much time gets wasted on expense management. Chasing receipts, categorizing transactions, waiting for expense reports, it adds up quickly. Ramp handles all of this automatically. Ramp is a corporate card expense management platform that over 40,000 companies like Shopify, CBRE, and Stripe are using to streamline their financial operations. But here's what makes their corporate card different. Every transaction gets automatically categorized and matched to receipts. No more wondering what that $47 charge was for 3 weeks later. You can set spending controls, get real-time alerts, and even block certain merchant categories. That sounds pretty cool. It's like having a finance team member embedded in every purchase. The platform integrates with your accounting system and ERP, so everything flows through without manual data entry. Whether you're issuing cards to a few employees or managing spend across departments, Ramp gives you visibility and control without the paperwork. Stop chasing receipts. Check out ramp.com/thepeel, get $250, and see what a corporate card can actually do for you. Time is money. Save both with Ramp. Thank you, Ramp. And now let's talk to Matt. Matt, welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. So I think probably the average listener has maybe heard of WordPress, but probably doesn't realize exactly how big and kind of the scale of all that. Can you just really quick kind of explain what WordPress is, explain what Automattic is, and then we can kind of get into it?
Sure. So the most important thing is WordPress is open source. So when you use WordPress, you have freedom, and you're increasing the amount of freedom in the world. It started as just blogging software. So just like journaling, that sort of thing. Then it expanded to run entire websites, and then became like an application platform. So people build all sorts of stuff on it. There's over 60,000 plugins and themes. I think the average WordPress install has like 30 plugins installed.
Oh, wow.
So every WordPress is totally unique. There's no two that are alike. So you can really make it your own. And we have this fun like action and hook system. So plugins can literally change everything about it. So I think that's the advantage. You can kind of get the best of SaaS and running it yourself. So you get kind of the best of both worlds.
And you guys, I think the stat that I saw was WordPress powers like 43% of all websites on the internet, something like that.
Yeah. So we are the largest CMS by a factor, by almost an order of magnitude. We're about 10x or 9x the number two.
And is that Shopify is like 4-ish%?
Yeah, Shopify has really grown super well. They went from like 1 to 4 in the past 5 years, percent. Um, they're very good at e-commerce. Obviously, we have a plugin for WordPress called WooCommerce, which is an open source Shopify, which I think is about 8% of all 8% of all websites in the world.
Oh, wow.
Uh, Basically, our plan is, it's community driven. So my company Automattic contributes quite a bit, but there's thousands of other companies and volunteers and individuals that also contribute to WordPress. And then the ecosystem of extensibility allows like a lot of people to do things that I would never imagine or even encourage. Sometimes with WordPress, people
Okay.
build crazy stuff on top of it.
Like unnecessary, like you probably should have made something else, or you should have used a different tool, or
Sometimes, but the thing that's been blowing my mind the most recently is this new thing we have called Playground, or there's a commercial version on WordPress.com called Studio. And, because in the beginning, you would have to have like a web host to play with WordPress. You set up a database server, everything. But now using this technology called WASM, like web assembly language, essentially, we actually spin up PHP and a SQLite database and everything. So you can now run WordPress in your browser, a full install in about a few seconds it takes to boot up. And it just runs locally. So it's instant.
okay, so you can be a grandma or someone who's not super technical and familiar with how this stuff works and just click a button and you're hosted and live with a WordPress site.
Well, what's cool is that, it's a local version. So it's just for you. And so you still would have to pay to get a host or to publish it to the world. But for sort of students or experimentation or learning to code or developer environment or anything like that, it's really, really cool to have this local version that you can just do anything with. And it's pretty much impossible to break because every single action is, it essentially keeps a journaled snapshot of everything you do. So if you ever want to roll back, you can just kind of like rewind your WordPress instance to a state when it wasn't broken, if you somehow break it. And like if you're changing the code or something like that. And so we think we're already seeing it being adopted in a ton of schools, particularly internationally. Um, the WordPress is strong in English, but I just got back from WordCamp Asia, which changes cities every year. But this year it was in Manila, the Philippines. And it's really amazing across India, Philippines, Indonesia, Japan, just the adoption. Actually, we get, I think, the number 2 country in the world for contributions to WordPress is Japan.
Really? I guess it may be slightly surprising, but not that surprising. It's a big country.
It's a big country, credible education system, a real dedication to crafts. That's kind of like, and we have like the jazz and everything that probably like maybe appeals culturally. And then this idea of open source that you build things to be good because they're good and it can be a public good as well. Like you don't just build it for commercial reasons, you build it to try to make humanity better.
Yeah, and I think the kind of the whole open source area I want to explore. I also want to understand just how did it all get started back. I know you started it. I think you were 19 when you started it, if I'm remembering right. But like, take us back to the early days. How did it all get going?
Rewind, early days. So blogging was uh, kind of popular. There were but dozens of CMSs.
So what year was this? Like 20?
Maybe 2001, 2002 kind of time frame. So Google had Blogger, Yahoo had something called 360, and Microsoft had MSN Spaces. Everyone had sort of a blogging system. But for ones you'd run yourself, the big ones were something called Movable Type, which was from a startup called Sixpart, funded by Reid Hoffman, if you remember him from LinkedIn and everything like that.
This is probably before he started LinkedIn, right? I think he started LinkedIn in 2003.
I'm not sure. It's kind of around the same time. He was a big deal, though. He had already done PayPal and stuff.
Yeah, PayPal and stuff. Yeah, yeah.
Now, the difference, Movable Type, you could download the code and run it on your server, but it wasn't actually an open source license.
So what's the big deal with that?
Well, they could change it. So I was attracted more to open source things built on the GPL, Apache license, things like Linux. And so I started using software called B2, Cafe Log was the name of this software out of Corsica, France. Single developer. It's still referred to in the WordPress source code because what happened was the software had been abandoned essentially. And I had been a volunteer for it on the forums and helping people out and contributing code and everything. And so myself and a gentleman named Mike Little, actually in the UK, where I am today, we had never met, but we were both kind of volunteers to the B2 project. So we teamed up to create a fork. So in open source, anyone in the world can take existing software, take all the code, and start a new project. The only sort of rule is you need a new name, essentially.
Oh, that's the only rule. Okay.
Well, just like with trademarks and stuff like that, user confusion. So we forked the software. We were actually, I think there were like 6 or 5 different forks. I forget how many. So we were one of many people who forked the software. But a friend in Houston at a blogger meetup came up with the name WordPress, Christine Chermelet. And then, I registered WordPress.org and we were off to the races. Now, Movable Type, let's rewind back to Movable Type. So we have like tens of users. They have like many, many tens of thousands and all the Silicon Valley funding and all this sort of stuff. But they introduced a new version, going from like version 2 to version 3. And it was kind of a rocky upgrade, as sometimes happens in software. And they also changed the pricing model. So people who used to pay like $50 would have to pay like $400.
Oh, wow.
So this caused like a mass exodus of people looking for an alternative. And luckily for WordPress, I don't remember if it was right before or right after, but we launched our movable type importer. So we had a way to bring all of your posts and categories, and which also meant that we had finally gotten feature parity with movable type, because you have to have a
competitive platform.
Totally. So a lot of people started adopting WordPress, upgrading to WordPress instead of upgrading to the new version of movable type. And we had very different technological choices. They were built on Perl and sort of like would generate static files. And we made the bet on Moore's Law, PHP, that everything would be dynamic and we'd kind of render at runtime, which was very controversial at the time because servers were a lot slower. But, kind of this idea that, well, they double in speed every 18 months. And that dynamics kind of faster and easier and better. When you use movable type, the more posts and pages you had, the bigger your site got, the slower it would get, right? Because it'd have to rebuild each one when you made a new post. Yeah, we bet on dynamic. That ended up being a really good bet.
So it's speed and then I guess like simplicity, it sounds like.
Well, the software was simple and kind of bad in the beginning.
You're saying WordPress original software was bad.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Because I was a 19-year-old kid. I didn't know a lot about design or performance or engineering or anything. I was learning as we went along. But as it grew, it started to attract more contributors. I also learned a lot just from doing it, and it just got better and better in each release. And we've had a very, since kind of the relatively early days, a very consistent release schedule. We release 3 times a year. And we are also obsessive about backwards compatibility. So actually a theme written in 2005 for WordPress still runs like 19 years, 20 years later. So I learned that from studying operating systems and platforms. And that was something Microsoft was always really good at, was this backwards compatibility. Apple's actually pretty good at it too. Now with like the Rosetta system that runs like x86 code, even though they're on their M series chips, ARM chips. So yeah, we were just obsessed with that. And that ended up working out pretty well. So this release schedule, this relentless kind of iteration, we just got a little bit better several times a year. Kind of like the Wikipedia. Wikipedia started off way worse than like Encyclopedia Britannica and everything. But after lots of iterations and lots of contributions, open source kind of wins in the long term. And that's why I've dedicated my life to open source, because it creates better software, better outcomes, and it's better for humanity because you have a bill of rights attached to the software that you can use it for any purpose. You can modify it, you can redistribute it, you can fork it like we did. That freedom is really, really important. And we don't get that from proprietary services or software.
Can you maybe explain that a little bit more for somebody who, like if somebody's listening to this and it's the first time they've ever heard people talk about open source and they're maybe still a little bit lost. Can you just maybe talk a little bit more about just the principles of open source?
It's about freedom, autonomy, and liberty. So let's talk about some counterexamples. I mentioned Movable Type. They came out with a new version. And to upgrade, you'd have to pay way more. Who's ever had that? Like, raise your hand if some service you're using has raised the price in the past year. All of them, right?
I mean, internet providers do that all the time. To even get on the internet, right? Like Comcast will give you this entry level deal of $30 a month, and then suddenly you're paying 100.
Even for functionality, though. So, a big focus of WordPress is we started a 10-year project actually in 2016 to create this new Gutenberg editor, basically like a richer editor that would allow you to design web pages. It's kind of like Lego blocks for building websites. We obviously think this is a really big deal. It's the default experience in WordPress. We're very excited about it. But there's a percentage of people who don't like it at all. So still to this day, there's millions of sites running the classic editor. So imagine software came up with an upgrade that you didn't like. With WordPress, you can install a plugin to make it work the old way. And with other software, you're just kind of stuck with it, right? Any proprietary app, if you're using and they change something, if you don't like it, you're kind of stuck with it. It's not like you can say, oh, give me the 2 weeks ago version of Twitter or Linear, or these are great apps, Salesforce. Like, these are obviously very successful, but ultimately you're what we sometimes refer to as a digital sharecropper. So you get some benefits, but you ultimately are not in control or own what you're using. So you're at the mercy of the king or whoever is actually controlling the software.
I think the thing that's so interesting from open source, from my perspective, like you'd think, okay, you're giving the software away for free. Like, how do you make money typically from open source software? Like, if you're obviously WordPress, you've raised money from investors, so that just tells me, okay, there's a business model of some kind. So, like, what does a business model usually look like in open source when you're giving things away for free?
Yeah, so WordPress has never raised money from investors, but I started a company called Automattic that did. And that's one of literally tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of companies in the WordPress ecosystem. So one of the freedoms that open source gives you is the freedom to charge for it. And people they say, like, well, if you could get it for free, why would anyone pay? But if you start to think about it, there's millions of things that you could get for free that we choose to pay for. Like, you could build your own house or repair your own car if you wanted to. But we generally trade time for money, or people like to support the creators of what they do. So, like, let's say your favorite band. I don't know, what's your favorite band right now? Someone you really like.
Avicii.
Avicii, cool. So, like, you could pirate Avicii's music if you wanted to. Or you could not go to the concert and stand outside the venue and maybe hear it or something like that. But, you want to support him, or now you want to support his family and his estate and things like that. So it just feels good to support your creators, because then they create more of what you like. And you encourage more of that in the world. In fact, with someone like Avicii, with his legacy, you might encourage other artists, that are inspired by his style or his story or his musical influences. So you vote with your wallet, essentially. And that's one of the most powerful things about capitalism, is your ability to vote with your wallet. So even though, and people thought this wouldn't work, by the way, some of the biggest controversies in WordPress's history was our enforcement of this, because we said, hey, in the WordPress.org directory, we're not going to have any code or allow you to link to any code that's not 100% GPL. There's some ways you can kind of get around the GPL. Like, it's kind of tricky, but like, you can make the PHP GPL, but you can make the JavaScript proprietary or something. So, like,
interesting. Well, and what is GPL?
Oh, GPL stands for the GNU Public License. It's an open source license that's used for Linux. It's used for WordPress. It's one of the more popular ones.
So if you create open source software, you like make a GPL, like a license for that specific piece of free code that people can use?
Yeah, it's based on copyright and licensing. So every piece of software has some license. And there is the sort of continuum from fully proprietary. So, like, you know those really long things you agree to when you install a new computer or install software
no one
in terms
reads.
of service?
Yeah.
No one reads. Yeah. Actually, on WordPress.com, we have one of these, and I put in some Easter eggs for people who actually read it. So there's some hidden surprises.
Have you gotten people to, they've called out that it's in there?
Totally, yeah. So if you're listening to this, you might find the Easter egg. Unless my lawyers removed it at some point. Sometimes fun stuff you do gets removed over time, but I think it's still in there. Where were we? Oh, so you choose the license. And most of the licenses are saying what you can't do with the software, or taking away your rights. or indemnifying the creator or things like that. So what the GPL does is basically saying like, hey, you can use this for any purpose. Now, if it doesn't work, by the way, you can't sue me or anything. Like it's, just and there's other licenses like public domain or the Creative Commons licenses are very interesting as ways to license creative works. So there's a big spectrum of licenses you can put out there or put your work under, your creative work, that makes it more accessible to the world. And of course, in the US, we have this concept of copyright expiring after a certain number of years. So I feel like we're actually entering where the very earliest Mickey Mouse, like the Steamboat Willie stuff, is about to go into the public domain.
I've seen those, yeah.
And of course, classical works like, Aesop's fables or things that are hundreds of years old, Shakespeare's plays are all in the public domain. So if you look at the incredible stuff that's been built on top of that intellectual property, it's really exciting. And this is not to say that proprietary licensing is wrong. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's just, I think there should be an option for folks who want to have, the choice to put their creative work under something that's more permissive and allows others to remix and build on top of it.
Yeah, so I think it's an important then delineation with some of the stuff that you kind of created and built. So WordPress is the open source project. Anyone can use that code to build a product with. And then you created a company called Automattic, which I think we're going to get into some of the different stuff Automattic does, which uses WordPress to. So then how does Automattic intersect with WordPress?
Yeah, so we sell goods and services on top of WordPress as one of our businesses. And then we also just make other cool open web stuff. Like we have a great podcasting app called Pocket Cast.
I've definitely come across it before, yeah.
If you love podcasting or listening to podcasts, Pocket Cast is probably one of the best power user ones out there. It gives you a lot of control over how you listen to things and folders and queues and all sorts of cool stuff there.
So then with Automattic, what was the thinking around, you were working on WordPress. How did you kind of create this different entity, Automattic? How did that kind of evolve? And what was how did that go? Because I'm assuming you were younger, right? Were you 19, 20, 21? At what point did you kind of make this separate entity and kind of start building a company?
So the first release of WordPress was when I was 19. It started to take off. I was attending the University of Houston, studying political science. And it started to take off. I visited San Francisco and over the summer, just took a week, slept on a friend's couch. But I went to all the tech companies, Google, et cetera. So I got job offers from like Yahoo, Google. But the most interesting one was a company called CNET, actually.
Oh, yeah, I remember seeing it. It's the news media, right? They did like reviews and stuff.
Yeah, so they had download.com and news.com. And it was one of the first like big internet media companies. I would say actually the first large scale internet media company, which also meant they created some of the first CMSs in the world, content management systems, because they're the first to have enough content to need management. So there's some early CMS software called Vignette that was really big. That was actually spun out of CNET. But so the reason I went to CNET versus some of these other companies that obviously have gone on to be successful, like Google, was they allowed me to work on open source and keep the copyright to my open source code. So having studied a lot of like jazz musicians and music history, I learned like when the artist didn't own their masters, sometimes they could be taken advantage of. And so it was very important of me to retain the copyright and be able to work on open source. So as a media company versus a technology company, like when you join a tech company, you sign over all your IP rights for code you create as an engineer, which is important because they need to be able to license the software and sort of say that this, this thing we're selling you, we actually have rights to. But CNET was allowing me to sort of carve off my open source stuff from the proprietary stuff I was creating from them. And I dropped out of school, moved to San Francisco, and I was there about a year. Of course, as soon as I got to San Francisco, VCs started circling.
Yep.
And WordPress was starting to take off. CNET was using it, a bunch of other people. And so I had this idea that, well, basically, could I get paid for working on WordPress? Because a lot of us were just doing it as volunteers. Like, what would be a business model or a way we could figure out how to make a little bit of money so that we could work on it full time versus kind of nights and weekends? That was really the original idea.
Okay.
I'm glad to say I've been doing it now for like 20 years, but more than full time. It sounds very obvious now because this is how the internet works, but at the time it was new, which is the software as a service. So to use WordPress in 2003, you would download a zip file unzip it to your computer. It open all these files, PHP files, JavaScript files. You'd FTP that to a server someplace that you'd set up, like a Linux server or a Windows server or something like that. You sort of configure a database. You'd like do all these. You basically have to be like a junior sysadmin to set it all up. And there were some companies that you could pay for maybe a virtual web hosting account, but they didn't have what was called like a one-click install. That was actually an innovation that we helped introduce to the industry, was this idea of like a very fast and easy install, even though the software is being configured. So I thought, well, what if we could make it just like one click easy, like signing up for like a Yahoo Mail account or something like that to set up a WordPress. So
I think I did do that. It's at some point back in high school. I did. I used It probably wasn't like the full uploading through FTP. I used cPanel for the website I had in high school. So I think there was like a plugin or something with my hosting where you could click a button to set up the WordPress. You still had to do a bunch with it, but you didn't have to actually literally upload it with FTP. Like it was like halfway in between the manual upload and the one click creation. So
totally. So cPanel is sort of was popular control panel software at the time, and that one-click installer that they did. A lot of people used it. I'm so excited to hear that you used that in high school, although it made me feel a little old.
yeah, I mean, I I yeah, I'm trying to think of what did I use it for? I know I've done it for like family members, like people uploading websites too. I'm trying to remember what else I used in it. That was probably like the one big plugin. There's maybe like an analytics one that I use. I just had like a website with friends in high school where we'd like learn to code. We'd like find a script and we'd upload it and play around with it and like learn PHP, learn CSS through stuff like that.
Totally.
I learned, or one of the one of the big things was I take game requests from friends and I would like rip them from eBaum's World, Albino Black Sheep, upload it on our website that wasn't blocked at school, so that people
Yeah, so
could
they
play
can
their
download
favorite
it.
games
Yeah.
at school. Yeah, yeah, that was definitely a blast from the past. You got this thing up and running. What were you charging for it? It was basically like a software as a service. Like you pay us $10 a month and you get your WordPress is up and live. Did you do all the hosting for people too?
Yeah, so WordPress.com. Well, we created two products. Actually, my first product was a plugin for WordPress called Akismet, which was now we call it machine learning or AI, but basically an anti-spam system. So, spam comments were a thing then. They're still annoyed now. And Akismet was a service to block them. And then we created WordPress.com, which is sort of like point and click Fisher Price WordPress. Very easy to get started.
Fisher Price WordPress. Okay.
The very first version, I think, was free. We had an invite system, so you had to get an invite.
Oh, really?
We were, I don't know if we did it at the very beginning, but we were ad supported. So we put ads on the website, but people started selling the invites because they really wanted in. So that's when we had sort of our first indicator that we might be onto something. And then we introduced upgrades like customization or turning off the ads, right? If you didn't want your site to have ads on it, you could pay an upgrade. That's evolved over the years where now it's a full sort of Amazon AWS-like hosting service. So WordPress.com, you can now use from a command line. You can spin up instances. It auto scales across multiple data centers. It's evolved quite a bit. Actually, the multiple data centers is a fun story because we're so broke. When we raised a little bit of money, I ended up spending most of it just buying servers, like physical servers from Dell.
That was pretty common back in the like mid 2000s, right? Like it was just you'd raise $1 million and 750K went on like buying some servers.
You literally just described what we did. And so went down to San Diego, plugged them in manually, screwed them in, configured it, everything. But we ended up outgrowing them pretty quickly. So I was like, well, what do I do now? I can't buy anymore. And there were just starting to be some of these services that would let you rent a server for like $99 a month on a credit card. Sort of proto AWS, like before virtualization and everything like that. And a lot of them are based in Texas. So because Texas had these big data centers because the Enron built out, actually. There's some fun history there.
Oh, really? Okay.
So we started just getting on credit cards, like additional servers at like Server Beach in San Antonio or EV1 servers in Houston. These are all gone now. But they would also give you a lot of bandwidth with every server, which was really useful because bandwidth was very scarce. But because we essentially had to become multi-data center from the very beginning because I had like the servers we had bought in San Diego that we were stuck with. They were kind of like the main ones. And I was spinning up these little ones, these different hosting providers all over the world to handle the demand and scale. And so we wrote what turned out to be very robust and anti-fragile multi-data center failover code that allowed for both replication and sort of failover. Because kind of similar to Google at the time, we get just a bunch of really cheap servers and assume they were going to fail, versus like spending a ton of money on like a really expensive thing that was never supposed to fail. And of course it did anyway, like a NetApp or these big file servers or things like that. So we had this kind of, we stumbled in because of necessity and lack of money, this highly distributed fault tolerant system.
And so this was how soon before or soon after this did you have AWS? And did you have like 10 different providers you were kind of working with and balancing? And I'm interested in just like that era of the internet, like as somebody running a business. I was a big user of the internet at this time, but like, what was it like then? Like, did you have like 10 different providers?
I think we were mostly in two, like some of these Texas, like $99 a month type things where you get a whole server. It looks like Amazon S3, which was the first AWS service, launched in 2006. So it was about a year after we did, or a little over a year. And it was just storage. It was just file storage. So their EC2 would come later, which was their sort of server platform. We actually still to this day don't run on any of the hyperclouds.
Oh, interesting. You have your own at this point, or?
Yeah, so we have about 20 presence in 23 or 25 data centers all over the world. Sort of some primary ones in the US and the Europe that are sort of like the big data centers. But like if a meteor hits one of them, like if a meteor hits Dallas, the others will step up to fill. WordPress.com's uptime is like pretty unmatched, which was a big deal at the time because there used to be things like the dig effect, where if you were featured on Dig, which is coming back now, or one of these websites, or Oprah mentions you, maybe to make a more mainstream example, like the sites would always go down. So we started to build in like caching and fault tolerance to make it so that we could scale for those big bursts of traffics, which ended up being sort of our next business, which was what we called VIP hosting. So this was for originally some bloggers. So TechCrunch started on WordPress.com. There was a blogger called Robert Scoble, had a really popular tech blog at the time. And they started getting a lot of traffic, more traffic than the big, sort of like CNET publications that they were starting to replace. And the blogs were out competing like the sort of traditional media. But then it turned out that platform was really useful for other folks too, like the NFL, who like gets a ton of traffic, very spiky traffic on certain days of the week, or certain parts of the year, like the Super Bowl. So that enterprise platform is still one of our big businesses today. So WordPress VIP, fast forward now runs like whitehouse.gov, a lot of major websites, a lot of major media like time.com. And so as you can imagine, security is really important with that. There's a lot of governments and people in the world who would love to hack whitehouse.gov.
Yeah, for sure.
Knock on wood, that's never happened with our systems. I hope it's very resistant to that. And of course, for scale, like traffic, everything like that.
So then how did you get all these people to start using it? Like you kind of alluded to, and we talked about essentially almost half the internet is run on WordPress at this point. What were some of the big things that you did in the early days? So like, it sounds like maybe the first one was you kind of intercepted that moment of the, I forget the name, Reid Hoffman.
Movable type, yeah.
Movable type. So movable type, you kind of intercepted their upgrade. Like, were there any other big things that you did that really like unlocked like a whole new level of growth over time?
I have to be honest here, and it speaks to one of our biggest weaknesses even today, which is we're really bad at marketing. So most of our competitors have like Super Bowl ads and like really slick commercials, and like, they sponsor, like Squarespace sponsors every podcast in the world and everything like that. So, and we've been really word of mouth and community based. So word of mouth, we try to teach people. We have something to believe in. So I like to say, don't just build a product, build a movement. So the fact that we're open source, we have this philosophy, a way we want the web to work. And then I guess the final thing is events. So we started doing these things called WordCamps, which were like these like super low cost events that anyone could spin up, almost like a TEDx or something. And these started to be hosted all over the world at universities and cities. And Meetups, meetup.com, we're still active with today. So like hundreds of cities around the world, WordPress users to get together once a month and talk about it. So that kind of like community building grounds up is very much always been at least what we've been most successful at. I would love to get better at some more traditional marketing because I think we could probably be even bigger, but it's just never been something we've cracked.
What do you think you did right on the community side? Because I think that's kind of something that I hear a lot of people talk about nowadays is, build a community around your product. Maybe the same things you did wouldn't necessarily work today, or maybe they would. But, if somebody were like, oh, how do I build a community around my product? How would you kind of talk somebody through thinking through of like the things that usually work best?
That's a good question. Number one, I would say, is lead by example. So when you're building a community, you got to show up and you got to exemplify the behavior that you want the community to do. So what were we doing? I used to, for these work camps, like when they started, if you organized one and got like 100 people to sign up, I would fly anywhere in the world.
Really? Okay.
And so I ended up in some very strange places. I just
Like, what's the craziest place?
I had no writer or anything. I'd just be like, hey, if you can find me a place to sleep with some air conditioning, I'm good. I'll get the plane ticket and just host me, and I'll speak at your events or your university or whatever. So I would just kind of go everywhere. And it's funny now, even 10, 15 years later, how many folks who are now sometimes have built huge businesses in the WordPress, like be tens of millions of dollars per year, tell me a story when I meet them about like, being on some small island in the Philippines, 12 years ago. And I went to their little town and spoke about open source and spoke about WordPress. I think you need something to believe in that's bigger than, just sort of self-interest. So giving people a shared mission and purpose and being consistent with it, over the years and decades, I think people really respect that. And being based on open source, that's kind of built into the foundation, our constitution, if you will, that sort of ensures that. The other thing I say is, this is community norms. So from the very beginning, being global and everything, we wanted to be like a space where everyone felt comfortable. And particularly, I think, for me, being a kid with no college degree, no one knew, like originally, like early contributions I would make were actually under pseudonym because I was worried no one would take me seriously if they like knew who I really was. So a lot of my early activity on the internet was pseudonymous. So we've always tried to be someplace that anyone feels comfortable, and including we still have some anonymous contributors today, but like, just kind of, and this is now a little more standard, but in the 2000s, it was perhaps a bit more progressive, just like whoever you are, whatever you are, however you want to show up, however you want to dress, however you want, like you're one of us. We're combined with a shared mission, this thing we believe in, and we don't want geographic borders or language borders or anything. And so, our early tagline was we wanted to democratize publishing. And to us, what that meant is making it radically accessible to anyone, regardless of economic ability, what language they spoke, anything. So another thing was translation of WordPress. That internationalization of the software, which was totally community driven, was really big for our growth then and still to this day.
So you mentioned something, you said people building companies on top of and around WordPress. So I know there's one that it's kind of been a little bit more in the news cycle lately. You've been a little bit more vocal about some of the things going on. Can you just kind of explain the backstory and what's going on with WP Engine?
Sure. Yeah. So there's a company called WP Engine that a lot of people think is officially WordPress, but it's not. They just have a sort of similar name. And they offer WordPress hosting, just like many other companies. They've done a really good job, I think, appealing to developers and agencies. And I think they've also, a lot of people believe that some of their naming and branding and how they presented themselves is some portion of their customers thought they were like official WordPress. So the beef or drama that people have probably heard is we started talking to them about their trademark use. WP Engine a few years ago was bought by a private equity firm called Silver Lake, which is a really large $100 billion plus private equity firm.
I was going to say, they're like one of the biggest asset management, like private market asset management firms.
Yeah, talk about who you don't want to pick a fight with. People whose bank account is numbered in the B's.
Yeah, multiple B's.
Multiple B's. But we've always, in the history of WordPress, even when it was very unpopular, sort of tried to stand up for our beliefs and what we believe is right. So, long story short, there's become a legal battle with WP Engine over their trademark use, and we, end up blocking them from some WordPress community events because we said you're not kind of a member in good standing anymore. And they've started a huge smear campaign against me and Automattic, and they're suing us. Both sides are now spending like millions of dollars in legal fees, sometimes per month. So it's been a huge distraction to the WordPress community in some ways. But I think it also illustrates that what Dries, who's the founder of Drupal, another great open source project, calls the maker versus taker problem. So one beautiful thing about open source is that, again, you can use it for whatever, and there's no requirement to give anything back or contribute to it or pay anything or something like that. But sort of going back to, we talked about artists earlier. Like you said you love Avicii. Imagine if everyone who loved Avicii never bought his music or never went to any of his concerts. He couldn't have continued doing it. So there's some balance there. Now, some small percentage will always be a pirate or a taker, but you sort of rely on the better angels of people's nature to think long term and say, okay, maybe that makes sense like in the short term, but the long term, if I do that, and if everyone does that, guess what? It's not going to work. Actually, it goes to like one of my favorite philosophers, John Rawls. Like this kind of like idea of like, okay, I want to build up rules in a system that even if I spawned a new entity and I couldn't predict who I was going to be, that I would want those rules to apply to me, not just my current instantation or my current life. That's luckily in WordPress's history. Although there's been a ton of commercial success, companies have participated really well in the community. And so that's the exceptions have been very, very rare. But every sort of 5 to 7 years, something will flare up where someone goes like outside the community norms, and there's usually like a bit of drama for like 6 to 18 months, and then it all comes down. And then 5 years in the future, no one talks about it. But we're in the midst of one of those sort of 6 to 18 month periods right now. It's been about actually, I think, 5 months.
Oh, so you think you might have another year to go, just if you take historical?
I hope it's another month to go, to be honest, because honestly, it's in everyone's incentives for this not to happen. So sometimes you can think short term. And I think one criticism of capitalism or private equity often is sometimes they optimize for a short term. But the balance of forces, I think, is very much that in the long term, by working together, by sort of contributing back, by creating this healthy commons that we all benefit from, everyone to do a lot better in the future. So a WP Engine that fully participates in the WordPress community and everything like that, I think is a wildly successful company 10 years from now. And I'd love to get to that point.
I'm curious then, like how should somebody in open source think about, like, if I'm a founder in open source and there's people that are, maybe overstepping some of the boundaries of like the common principles of open source, are there ways I should maybe think about how to approach the situation? Like if I'm in a similar boat as Matt, whether I'm Automattic scale or whether I'm just early days scale, any advice for approaching some of these situations?
We talked about how to build community before. I think a good thing to start with is leading by example. So there's a WordPress foundation, a nonprofit foundation. And one thing we've always done is our excess money, we grant out to other like-minded foundations at the end of each year. And for my company, Automattic, we do periodic audits, and any engineer can suggest, hey, we're using this library or this thing that's really important for software. And so it's like, okay, we go to their website and say, do they have a way to donate? And so we're, I think, one of the largest sponsors of the PHP Foundation. I support a lot of stuff on like the GitHub patrons and other things like that. So just like, how do you sort of pay it forward? And a little goes a long way, So it's you'd be surprised how many folks don't think about that. Even to the very early days of WordPress, one of the things that sort of started our first business model was I got this like $500 donation when it was still just kind of me. It wasn't like an official business or anything like that. And it was someone who took the money they would have paid to upgrade movable type and decided to donate it to the developers of WordPress. And so that again kind of shocked me and was like, whoa, maybe this could actually be something that we could, if we create a way for people to do that, like easier, perhaps that could be a model. And I do think that for open source companies, it's good to have something commercial that people can buy, whether that's support or provide some value that sort of fits in people's minds, uh, in addition to just pure donations. So it's kind of like how Patreons often will have like little gifts, or even NPR will send you like a little tote bag when you donate.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's just have something. It could be a T-shirt. It could be whatever. It doesn't even have to be something attached to the software, but something to sort of thank people for their support. And yeah, we're always looking for ways to do that. Now at scale, this can it can become big. So actually in WordPress, we have this program called Five for the Future, which is something we introduced more formally a few years ago. Which basically said, hey, think of a way to support the commons. So whatever 5% means to you. So maybe if you're like a full-time freelancer building WordPress sites for people, you look for 2 hours a week, 2 hours out of your 40-hour work week that you kind of contribute back, volunteer. Um, for Automattic, that scaled to being basically 100 full-time people. When we were like 2,000 folks, 5% is 100 full-time. So over the years, we've contributed countless, at this point, tens or maybe over $100 million worth of sort of investment into the volunteer part of WordPress, the part that's available to everyone, not just us.
Yeah, I think you and it's maybe you're not bringing this up. This is me bringing this up, but you had a blog post on your website where you specifically, I think you laid out like public charitable contributions that you made over time. I was like, wow, it's a lot of money that it looks like you're donating every single year, but like that's kind of like a pretty bold move to just put that out publicly, especially when you probably didn't need to necessarily. But it seems like it's pretty important to you.
This was in kind of the kind of a height of the battle, and I was getting attacked a lot personally. And I've always just tried to have a personal philanthropy program. And part of the point I was trying to make is I don't know if I would do this again, but I was like, I think I'm donating personally more to nonprofits than this WP Engine company, which makes $400 million per year, is donating to anything. And they list one of their company values as being like, we give back. And so I was like, well, I don't know. I'm as an individual, like individual that's done well, but like I'm donating double-digit percentage of my income every year to nonprofits like 501(c), check it with the IRS, sort of things. So and that's on top of everything that we've talked about. Like all these contributions, by the way, are not like when you volunteer for WordPress, it's not tax deductible, right? It's not like an official 501(c). So that's on top of all that other stuff that we've talked about so far. But it's been fun. Like, the Bay Lights in San Francisco is a project I've been proud to be a supporter of. Um, the Innocence Project, which does DNA exonerations of people who've been wrongfully convicted for crimes. Sometimes decades later, DNA will say like, hey, this person who's been on death row didn't actually commit this crime. So this is just fun stuff. These days, I'm also really excited about supporting science. Nat Friedman's project, which was the Vesuvius Project, which is decoding these ancient scrolls using like MRI. They basically scan them and machine learn like to decode the text of these like charred scrolls that were buried in a volcano. So just stuff like that. I like looking for things that are a little obscure or maybe like not mainstream causes, and almost like a venture capital philanthropy model where I'm like, what's the weird thing that probably isn't going to work, probably going to fail, but like no one else is doing, and maybe that'll turn into something big.
Yeah, or like the thing he's doing with the plastic list, I think is super interesting.
Oh, that's not me. That's Nat Friedman. That's incredible.
Yeah, well, I mean that's another one of those projects where it's like I don't know how you make money from that. Like you start a new plastic chemical company that's like better, like it's not bad for you or something. Like I'm not sure how you commercialize that, but that's kind of why you need somebody to just kind of have this. I'm just doing this. I'm putting all this information out there. Oh, by the way, all these different products are not that healthy for you. I'm not doing anything with them, just putting it out there and you just make it kind of public for people. Uh, it's like we kind of need people to be doing stuff like that. And it's kind of like that's one of the things when I first saw it, I was like, wow, that's super cool. Like it's been a problem that me and my wife have been thinking a lot about. Like we've used glass containers in our house for years, like trying to avoid plastic wherever we can. And it's like, this is genius. Just study, do the research on measuring the levels and all this stuff and just put it out there. people can see it, and then let them do something with it.
And this was probably influenced by like the idea of tithing at church or something like that. That was supposed to be pretty young, but like, don't wait until you're old to start giving back. And it's incredible, this cohort. We've mentioned Nat Friedman a few times. I find him a big inspiration. And it's probably not a coincidence that he was CEO of GitHub at one point, right? The largest open source hosting place. But you also look at folks like Patrick Collison with the Arc Institute, or Guillermo Roche from, I might have mispronounced that, but from Vercel. Actually, an alumni of Automattic. We bought one of his previous startups.
Oh, interesting.
These folks aren't waiting till they're old and retired to give back. They're doing it as they go. And I think that's nice because you can also contribute, your time and maybe your expertise to these different causes.
Yeah. It's kind of one of the things that I feel like I wish the world was a little bit different, where like, let's say, for example, there's this giving back, like the 99% pledge. I think that Warren Buffett is really big on. So you say, on paper, Warren Buffett, one of the wealthiest people in the world, he says he's going to donate 99% of his wealth. And I don't know what that number is as of today, but it's probably, $100 billion. But he's not doing anything with it today. Like, it's like he could be doing something. And then, but I think the thing that is the most kind of in my mind, I'm like, you could be doing so much, is like, he owns a large percentage of some companies where you might say some of your business practices are probably not good for the world. And, let's say we fast forward, whatever period of time, you pass away, you donate the wealth, and you try to fix all these issues. But it's like, you can influence those companies today. Like, you can change so many things positively in the world. You don't even have to donate your money. Like, you can still keep it all if you want.
I would say yes and. So, well, one, the giving pledge and other things, a common misperception, entrepreneurs know this, like the idea of net worth for a lot of these folks who we say are the richest people in the world, it's not truly liquid. It's not like Elon Musk has $200 billion in a bank account he could spend on anything. No, it's stock in his company. And if you try to sell it all, by the way, that would crash. So
if he truly liquidated everything, it's probably like 30% of what it actually is, or something like that.
If that, because what would the signal be to like Tesla shareholders that Elon's selling all his stock? Like, that would probably freak everyone out. Could go down 95% or something. So there is that sort of, I think, misperception of income versus like net worth. But I think you really nailed it. That I think in addition to finding causes to support and sort of this idea for Five for the future, like if you can build it in, like now, like take 5% of your post-tax income or pre-tax income and just kind of put it in a DAF. Adam Nash has this great new thing called Daffy that makes it very easy to make a donor advised fund. Set that up. You can donate appreciated stock, you can donate cash. There's all these sorts of things. And then that encourages you to start, even if it's small, even if it's like just $100, a month or something. You'd be surprised how much that can mean, especially to some smaller local organizations. And if people are wondering where to start, I would encourage people to look local first. So find things in your neighborhood, schools, arts programs. In Houston, I support a lot of sort of music programs because I got so much from sort of the public education and music programs growing up there. So buying instruments, a couple $1,000s worth of instruments can sort of transform an elementary school. And you'd be surprised, like a little can really go a long way. But you also talked about like, how do you build your company? And I love this idea of conscious capitalism. It's kind of a word I use for it, but just kind of like building a company in a way that, you'd want your children or grandchildren to work there. How are you giving back to the world? For us, the big thing that we really took a risk on there and has now become a lot more mainstream is remote or distributed work. So kind of looking at the balance of things is I wanted to create economic opportunity and an opportunity to work for Automattic for people all over the world. And I wanted them to be able to have a lot more control over their schedule or their lives when they did it. So that sort of led us, by the way, a lot of our open source works in a distributed fashion. So we're like, okay.
Yeah, fair. You're probably inspired in a way. Yeah.
2005, 90% of investors I spoke to wouldn't invest in us because we didn't, have a headquarters and everyone in an office. Rightly so. A very, very smart investor, one of the probably top 5 in the world, said to me like, hey, Microsoft, Oracle, Yahoo, Google, name every super successful tech company. All of them at headquarters, and especially in the early days, like we're all physically co-located with each other. Why do it differently? Like we know this works. Like, and
So you literally don't have a headquarters, or do you now at this point?
well, we have like a mailing address and an office. We'll do events and meetups and board meetings, but like it's it's de minimis. I think average daily attendance is probably like dozen per month out of the thousands of people we have. So uh, yeah, I mean, you need an address, but you can also get a PO box or something. The We've always tried to build it where the center of gravity was not in a physical location, because I want people to be able to participate equally. There's another thing that happens. Google now has offices all over the world, but talk to executives in London or one of the or Zurich or one of their offices that isn't Mountain View, and they're far away from the sun. You know, the opportunities to advance or influence the future of the company is probably less than if they were in Mountain View. So they typically end up going to wherever the sun is, the CEO is, wherever the sort of center of gravity is, a big part of the year, just to stay relevant. And I wanted to create an environment where people could be influential no matter where they were in the world or what time zone they worked in. It turns out you do this for reasons that I talked about. It gives you access to the best talents and other things. But you also end up allowing people to contribute who might not otherwise work at a normal company. Like a lot of parents, particularly moms, who are often have a larger portion of the sort of caregiving for both young or elder ones, can sort of design their schedule where they can still rock a job and contribute just as much as anyone else, but maybe at some different hours than the sort of 9 to 5 office hours.
Yeah, I think moms are probably like the most slept on and underappreciated. Teachers also, I say, are very underappreciated, but I feel like moms, like parents in general, but moms is like they. You just think about like the skill that it takes. So you have 2 kids, 3 kids. You're like raising these things that don't even know how to speak or communicate with you, and you're like bringing them up and like making them a member of society. Like that is so difficult, and like you're basically like a boss for employees that don't want to listen to you, and you get them to do what you want, and then it's like that is extremely difficult, and then you just go work with some people in an office and like build a product or whatever, like maybe slightly different skill set, but like so much easier also at the same time.
Yeah, definitely. I think probably the most challenging and I'm told the most rewarding job in the world is being a parent. But yeah, talk about project management, motivation, dealing with wild scenarios and things going wrong, and handling it with calm and aplomb. Yeah,
It's fun though. I mean, we have 2 kids. I mean, I love it. I love having kids, but it's not easy. I think if you think having kids is easy, you're that's not what you're signing up for. I think you have to learn how to not be selfish also. Like for me, just as all of a sudden you have these 2 kids where you've got to do certain things that you might not want to do. Like you might personally not be that interested in, but you kind of learn to get joy from just spending time with your kids, watching them grow up, teaching them things. We had a kind of a fun moment the past couple weeks. We started playing Minecraft together, and they're like 4 and 8, so like can kind of start to get it. And I had played Minecraft back in college when it first came out, and so it was kind of cool to like go back and play this with them. And I felt like I was actually like pretty good at it because I was just I knew how to play it, and it's just kind of fun like exploring, building stuff, and um, I think the other crazy moment is the first time I texted my oldest daughter when she was like texting me back. It was just kind of this
oh,
surreal,
cool.
like it was like a chat GPT moment where like you talk to chat GPT, it says something back. And like when my daughter was texting me, we were going back and forth. I was like, this is kind of wild. Like we created this thing, and this person that we made is like now, she's like coherent. Like when they talk to you, it's definitely like one of those moments. But for some reason, it hit me really hard. I think it's just growing up on the internet as a kid, like texting and back and forth was a big channel or like a big communication channel. So I don't know. That one just blew my mind.
We now have contributors to WordPress that are younger than WordPress itself.
Really?
And
Okay.
I was just in Ireland, and actually the very first employee of Automattic is based in Blarney, Ireland. So I was in the area. I was able to have a nice lunch with him and his wife. And I remember his daughter was born while he was working. It's like the first baby that anyone had at the company. And now she's 18. She's she's like an adult and going out into the world and all these sorts of things. It's kind of wild, very rewarding.
One question I wanted to ask, because you kind of hit on this when you talk about fundraising, you said 90% of investors were just, this is a non-negotiable with the remote work. You open source probably.
And open source. By the way, we were weird in so many ways. And I was a kid and all these sorts of things. Yeah. And lots of reasons not to invest.
So what was that like then back in, it sounds like early 2000s or mid 2000s? Like what was that process like, just trying to raise money? How did you kind of figure all that out? How did you land it? Just take us inside those couple instances.
I call it a great filter. And, I talk about the folks who said no. I'd also just like to give huge kudos to the folks who said yes, took a chance on this. And, Phil Black from True Ventures, some of these folks now that have gone on to some really amazing careers, sort of looked at not just sort of the pattern matching for things that have been successful before, but what was, perhaps there was a new model that was being created. And I would say the advice I'd give is that, because you said you had an audience of entrepreneurs, I think it's fine and actually important to have these principles and ways you want to build things. However, if you fail as a business, you'll become a story for why businesses shouldn't do that in the future. So it's actually really important to be commercially successful as well. I'd say doubly so if you're doing something a little unusual, because otherwise you could set back things a generation. And so I always go back to this Walt Disney quote, like, we don't make movies to make money, we make money to make more movies. Like, if I want to keep working on open source and I want more companies to be distributed and everything like that, like, we need to build a successful business. And people can point to us as a positive example, not a negative example. And, there was a lot of worry in the early days that, maybe this is going to be a lifestyle business, or like a Craigslist where it, gets a ton of usage and a ton of value, or Wikipedia, like a nonprofit. Like, maybe it works for that, but not like a successful commercial thing. So it's actually been really motivating sometimes because, I would say in our employee base, a lot of people are far more motivated by some of these open source ideals than necessarily building a business. So we always go back to say, like, hey, let's be as successful as possible as a business, because then, one, we'll put more money into open source, both ourselves and supporting other companies. But two, we're going to inspire a lot more companies to build this way, and a lot more investors to feel safe investing in a company that, has these ideals and things like that. So it's kind of counterintuitive, So sometimes some capitalists think I'm like a raging hippie, and some raging hippies think I'm like, unredeemable capitalist. So I think that's probably a good middle ground. And the middle ground, I think, is the right way, where you can build something that contributes a lot back to society by how you operate as a business that you put so eloquently earlier. And, experiment with some new ideals or some beliefs, that principles that you hold true. And that, I think, is what fuels you through the downsides, through the tough times, and also attracts a level of talent to you that you wouldn't be able to get otherwise.
Interesting. Yeah, I like thinking about it that way. I think one thought it reminded me of, are you familiar with Palantir? They do this thing called the forward deployed engineers. It's basically, you have a technical person that goes and sits with the customer and just make sure that the product is implemented. It's kind of a sales role. It's kind of a product role. It's kind of troubleshooting, customer support, engineering. It's really like you're doing a lot, but the concept is a forward deployed engineer. That's kind of how they describe it. And there's definitely a time, just speaking about Palantir as what should the company be valued at, right? Like, there's probably a period of time in Silicon Valley where a lot of people's like, that's a fake company. Like, that's not real. It should be a zero. I think maybe that's changed today. But like a lot of people thought this forward deployed engineer concept was just dumb, because like Palantir is worth nothing. Like, it's a zero. So that thing that they're doing doesn't work. Versus, I think if you look at it today, if you just pull up the stock price, you're like, okay, I guess it is a good business model. Like, I guess it does work. So, okay, what do they do? It's this forward deployed engineer thing. So like now it's kind of leaned in the opposite direction, where people think like, oh, this must be, if you just have forward deployed engineers, you'll be a $100 billion company like Palantir. So it's probably something a little bit in the middle. Like I think the general concept is pretty interesting. Um, it probably works with Palantir because they sign these massive contracts with the government, and you're just making sure that the customers sticks and they keep paying, and they probably have certain entities that are paying them $50 million, whatever. Like they have these massive contracts, so you can justify paying a couple $100,000 salary of like on site, part of your customer acquisition or implementation costs. Um, that's like one of the most interesting examples, I think, when you just think about the proving that something actually works, and like proving that a certain model is actually a way to doing it by being successful, and then just other people say like, oh, this must work. You almost give the other people the ability to do something hard because you've proven that it works, and they get a little bit of slack to like try something that might be hard or might not quite be the smartest way to do it, or something, or you make it so that is the way to do it. You make that is the kind of the best practice or the standard. So
It's one of my favorite sort of newsletters, Twitter accounts is called the Pessimist Archive.
oh yeah, I think I've seen some stuff from that account.
It's fun because they go way back, like 100 years sometimes.
Yep, it's all like newspaper headlines.
Yeah, look at cover articles predicting the death of Apple, or saying how Google was never going to work because they didn't have enough advertisements, or YouTube was going to fail, or I wish if I had a nickel for every time people said WordPress was dead or blogging was dead. It's it's kind of easier to be a pessimist in the world, and also sometimes pessimists are right, but it doesn't mean that they're right the next time. And there's so many examples of people who are like right once and they predict doom the rest of their career and miss it. Was the joke that the economists have correctly predicted 20 of the last 5 recessions or something?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, or there's a joke there. But
there's that one guy, Robert Kawasaki. He wrote one of those books. Are you familiar with him?
No.
He's just this guy that like every month he has this new tweet that he puts out saying it's like the stock market's going to collapse and like it's the end of the Western world, and like
he'll be right eventually.
Yeah, he will be right eventually, and he was right in 2007. But he does it every month basically for a decade. And it's like, yeah, I guess a broken clock is right, once a decade.
There was this fun hack people used to do in the early days of Twitter where they would create a prediction account that wasn't very popular, and they, I forget, I'll just give an example, I'll make it up, like predict the winner of the Super Bowl and the exact score. But what they did is they published like 1,000 tweets with all possible permutations, and they deleted all the ones that weren't correct, and then they pointed to the one that was correct afterwards. And look, it's timestamped, it's old, etc.
I'm a genius.
Since you have an audience of entrepreneurs, it takes far more bravery and courage to be optimistic. And I just encourage folks to, keep that flame alive, the optimism and the principles and the things that sort of like inspire you to build, because you really need that. And I would say one of the hardest things in creative work, whether you're an artist, whether you're an engineer, whether you're a product person, is keeping that childlike flame alive, because so much of society is sort of almost designed to extinguish it. So whatever it is that you have to do to kind of keep that flame alive in the face of however much criticism or people believing no or whatever it is really, really important.
Do you have any advice for doing that, or anything that worked best for you?
For me, there were some personal practices. So meditation's been really big in my life. It took me a long time, probably until like I was almost 30, but just exercise is so good for your mood and your brain. That's actually the thing that got me started exercising. Was I read this book by John Medina called Brain Rules. And I was like, oh, great. I use my brain all the time. This is kind of my meal ticket. So how can I make my brain better? And rule number 1 was exercise. I was like, oh, darn it. I don't like that at all. But, it turns out even just going for walks, and if you look at so many great thinkers over the years, like sometimes just go for walks can be really, really powerful and actually get you like 80% of the calorie burn of jogging or something. It's kind of annoying how much walking is effective.
It's just so effective, but it's like annoying knowing that like, man, I'm not walking enough and I just need to do it more.
Do walking meetings, listening to podcasts, walking calls. Like there's so many ways you can kind of add in walking, a treadmill desk, to your daily things. I have some colleagues who've like had incredible like body transformations just by getting a treadmill desk. and kind of that sort of, you don't have to walk fast, walk at like a mile and a half, a mile per hour or something. Like it just, that little bit of movement is really helpful. There's that saying that like sitting is like the new smoking, and how tough it is, how much time we spend sitting every day. Um, then so that's kind of like so, that kind of idea of putting your oxygen mask on first, I think is really important. And that sort of, uh, including self-love, I think is then, once you get better at that and practice more of that, then you can expand that circle to be more of a support to others, to be more loving to others. I forget the name of the poet, but it was something like, I'll paraphrase, love yourself so fiercely that others see how to do it.
Huh. I've never heard that before.
It's we'll find that actual attribution there. It's always been one that's spoken to me. And then earlier you talked about forward deployed engineers, and I would say like, to me, something that's always sort of relit the flame is going to WordCamps and meeting members of the WordPress community. And so many people will come up to me and talk about how they learned the code from, installing WordPress on a cPanel server, or, it sort of, they built a business, or it was an amazing story of a teacher in northern India. And he told me, our family couldn't even afford like a full meal per day. We were often hungry. But at his school, we had an internet connection. And he said, every day I tried to learn something. And he'd stay like 30 minutes, 45 minutes extra. And he learned the code and started building WordPress sites. And all of a sudden, just a little bit there, even a couple $100 was like a huge deal
That's
to
a
him and his
lot in
family.
India, yeah.
Now he works for one of the top agencies there. He has a totally different life. He's transformed not just his life, but the life of his family, and been able to send money back and everything like that. Like that kind of story, like you couldn't make it up. If I were to hire like a PR firm and say, please, like find me the best, but this person just came up to me at the most recent WordCamp Asia. And it was a time, I was probably a little tired. I was jet lagged. I was like, okay, but I'll have this conversation. And it gave me so much inspiration. And so I try to remind myself of those stories when I'm feeling, down or anything. And I do want to say that like all the things I said, sometimes you still feel terrible. So if you're feeling terrible, don't worry. Every entrepreneur you admire has had those sort of dark nights of the soul, or things where you feel like everything's going the wrong way. And but if you get up to fight another day, that's sometimes all it takes. And so much of I think our success has just been persistence. And so many of our competitors are the things I think just kind of gave up along the way.
I know this is a slightly different topic, but I really wanted to talk about this. So I've heard you mention that you are still like one of the primary developers of WordPress. Like you're still coding, you're very hands-on with it. We got to talk a little bit about AI. How are you kind of seeing that change coding? How do you think that's going to change the internet, open source? Pretty open-ended, but I'm just curious your thoughts on it.
Yeah. So I'll clarify. I'm still the lead developer of WordPress, but I do a lot more directing of code. Now I do love to code. So I code a lot for personal projects and sort of different things. And AI has completely transformed that for me, at least, especially as someone who I'm often trying to find hours in the early morning or late night to hack on something. Transformative things that used to, I think, would have taken me, 8 hours or days when I was in my fully locked in 20-something young year old coding
You're
8
like you
hours a
could
week.
lock in for a weekend and just commit the 20 hours.
I can now do that stuff in like 30 minutes. And that's with like the version that was 6 months ago. I haven't even like tried out the Claude Code stuff yet. So I've been really encouraging, every couple of years. It's happened kind of twice in WordPress's history where I've gone to the community and said, hey, there's this new technology. I need you to learn it deeply. And people kind of make fun of that because I said, learn deeply. And so the first time that happened was with JavaScript, because at the time, 95% of WordPress's code was PHP. And I was like, hey, there's this new model. We need to become more of an application, not just a, reloading the page type of thing. It was sort of around the same time we were starting Gutenberg. And so I went to the community and said, learn JavaScript deeply. And if you fast forward today, actually a majority of new code in WordPress is JavaScript. So it's really transformed. And again, kind of obvious now, but in 2016, that was a big ask. And 2022, before the launch of ChatGPT, I said, learn AI deeply. And I just feel very, very strongly that it's going to be an incredibly democratizing technology. And folks, even, if you have an idea and good product sense or good design or whatever your skill set is, but maybe code was not accessible to you, Or if you're an engineer already, that's kind of like the best, is you'll be able to work with these tools to just be way more productive. Um, Now, even saying that, I would say the adoption, both in WordPress and even within my own company, has been uneven. But the folks who are doing it, including some like the founders of startups that we bought, are now having like some amazing outcomes. And I don't think it's, this idea of a 10x engineer, I used to kind of make fun of. I didn't think it would, you know, I would think a lot more of like 10x teams or something like that. But now I'm actually seeing 10x engineers
Really?
because
Okay.
they have a team of AI agents or something assisting them that allows them to multiply their creativity, their talent, their time. So um, it's still early days. These tools are clunky. Like there's a bunch of different ones. There's new stuff all the time. Like for a while, it was Cursor was the best kind of AI assisted ID. Now, like a lot of my colleagues are using something called Windsurf. So like, but just play with it. So I would say like make a portion of your week kind of where you just like turn off all notifications, turn off social media, and just like play with these different tools. And if you follow me on Twitter, I'm at Photomatt, Photomatt. I actually share a lot of this stuff on Twitter. Even though like sometimes I feel like Twitter is my biggest vice and a big distraction, there's so much good AI stuff on there. It kind of keeps me on there. And funny accounts like yours. So like those are things that keep me on Twitter.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good to know that
You're on the good side.
So one other question that I have is, I know that Atomic, you do this kind of unique kind of secondary buyback slash giving shares to employees. It's kind of like this liquidity marketplace. I just had a listener ask me. He specifically said, "Can you please just have Matt talk about this and how it works? Because I'm just interested in seeing if I can somehow implement it in my company." So I'm just curious if you could kind of explain what you do and just kind of how it works.
Yeah, and I will say this is on our to-do list to open source. So, but in the meantime, I'll just describe it really briefly. You know, Typically how you create more ownership in the company is stock options or RSUs, and typically RSUs kind of later.
Yeah, stock options, they have the right to purchase. They use their money to purchase the shares and they get a certain price in the future. RSUs are you give them the stock. Essentially, they're granted and then they need to do certain things need to happen, but they get the stock.
I'll describe just super quickly. These are very deep topics, but just to say some of the downsides of these options expire. So they have to be exercised within a certain amount of time. Now, I think that, we said 10 years now, and companies used to go public or something in 5 to 7 years. VCs used to optimize their exits there. I think now the time that companies stay private and grow to very, very huge valuations like Uber before its IPO or Stripe today, like could be in the tens or even hundreds of billions of dollars for something like a SpaceX. So this means that this actually happened to me recently where I had some options that were granted in 2013 that were expiring. And then you have to exercise them. You can end up with a huge tax bill, all this sort of stuff. And so the other thing is that options, so the pricing, I think they're really nice at the very early stages of a company, when the options are valued in the pennies. But as soon as you start fundraising and other things, you have this thing called a 409A valuation that can change it. And it always felt unfair to me that someone who could be hired weeks apart, from someone else, really like it's just sort of a function of like when the board meeting was that approved the 409A valuation or something like that, could have a wildly different economic outcome. RSUs are stands for restricted stock unit. And I'd say the main downside there is that if I grant you 100 grand in RSUs, you now owe taxes on that immediately. And if you're not able to sell that RSU or exercise it, again, that might be tough. Again, if you're a public company and it's totally liquid, this isn't a big deal. But for private companies, this can create burdens actually on people. So I was like, well, what if we could do something that was kind of like an option, kind of like an RSU, gave some benefits to employees, but also wasn't necessarily required. So they could choose if they wanted to participate in it or not. So fast forward, again, I'll try to get the TLDR. With Automattic, we moved to a model where we don't grant stock by default or send offer letters with options or anything like that. Really since like 2013, I think we removed that as kind of a default thing we were doing. But what we did was we sort of went up on the cash compensation, right? Because cash is fully fungible. And you could choose it to invest it in Automattic, or you could invest in an S&P 500. By the way, probably should do both. Now, one thing that sophisticated investors have, like when a VC invests in a company, they typically have what's called like a liquidation preference or a 1x liquidation preference. Is fairly standard, which basically means like no matter what happens, they get their at least 1x of their money. So they're downside protected. This is huge for returns, right? Because as Warren Buffett would rather say, just don't lose money.
That's the number one rule. So like, there you go. You solve for that.
A big part of the way there. So it's like, could I give everyday employees a 1x liquidation preference? And then also a good entry price, essentially. So we created this new class of stock we call A12 stock. It's can only be bought and sold by the company. Employees can buy it at the 4.1A price, essentially, which is typically a pretty good discount to what the open market trading value of Automattic might be, or the sort of intrinsic terminal value if we were sold or went public or something like that. Especially if we haven't done a fundraise in a while. So usually when you do a fundraise, the 4.1A will spike to whatever the fundraise is, but as the time goes on, it will typically come down, often below what the fundraise was at. So, they say don't time the market, but it's actually pretty easy to time. Good times to buy this A12 stock or something like that. And the company provides a 1x liquidation preference. We also, another restriction is you have to hold it for 1 year. But then so that sort of removes the short-term versus long-term capital gains issue that can come up for people. And it's just an internal market. So as an employee, you get to choose how much of your compensation you want to put into this. There's a limit for how much you can buy because we don't obviously this could be really exploited by someone who's very smart, but it's a pretty high limit. And you have to trust that the company is going to be able to meet these obligations in the future. So maybe not great if a company is in the very early stages, but if, once you get into the tens or hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue, solid customer base, I think this could be a good thing for an employee to consider as part of their overall financial plan. And that liquidity is really nice. Just that sort of knowing that there's going to be regular intervals is huge, which you don't necessarily have if you have common stock, which might happen in the secondary. The other cool thing is it's yours. You bought it and it's yours. Whether you're an employee of the company or not, you have the same options to sell it. You can't buy it anymore, but you can always have those selling windows. And I think that's also really good because sometimes companies sort of famously will give secondary opportunities to current employees, but not former employees. And I wanted to create something that was very fair to everyone.
Oh, so even former employees can participate in this too if they still own the shares?
Yeah, which also means that if, again, when you think very long term, what if someone passes away? All of a sudden, whoever they pass these shares to also now has that right to sell them at these sort of liquidity windows. So there's a lot of cool things built into this program that we sort of implemented. And I'd encourage people to consider something like it. Some other companies have implemented versions of this, and it's an honor to sort of open source the legal docs and sort of some of the technical implementations so that almost like a safe note, other companies could copy and paste this. We've done this for a lot of our things. So our terms of service that we talked about earlier is available under the Creative Commons. So you could copy and paste that terms of service if you wanted. Our creed is under the same. A lot of our documentation is open source. So again, what's stuff that we had to pay for or do a lot of work for that we can now open source and allow other entrepreneurs to just copy and paste and then build something cool on top of it. I'm always thinking about that sort of remix. And if they build something really cool, maybe we can copy it back and incorporate that upstream. So it's kind of like applying open source to legal docs, to everything. And if there's something we end on, I would say this thing we've talked about for open source, think about how you can apply it to areas that aren't just software. What does it look like to share and allow to remix other creative works or other, academic papers or whatever. And if you apply open source to different areas, we already talked about software with things like WordPress and, MySQL, encyclopedias with Wikipedia, but you apply open source to finance and you get things like Bitcoin.
Yeah, there you go.
Ethereum, which is open source. So people don't realize open source is now starting to transform society in so many ways. And I think it's really cool for people, whatever stage you are in your career, to really investigate and try to embrace it. See how you can be part of, because you become part of building the building blocks for humanity's future versus a proprietary product that could be very successful, but then might not be around 100 years from now. In fact, likely it will not, if you look at sort of the survival rates of commercial companies, even that were, at the very top of their game.
Yeah, if you look at what are some of the longest standing, it's GE, which I think went bankrupt, Ford, which is worth less than some of the humanoid robotics company startups now. It's maybe, yeah. And I think Ford went bankrupt, or no, GM went bankrupt. So like, yeah, it's like some of these companies. You probably get in like the European chemical companies. I feel like some of those have been around for over 100 years. But
A foundation I love, a nonprofit, is called the Long Now Foundation. And they actually study long-standing institutions. And there's some very cool examples. There's temples in Japan that have been around for 1,000+ years. And there's some pretty cool examples of long-standing institutions. And so if you study those, you see like what might be the ingredients. One, it turns out, is maintenance, which actually is the topic of Stuart Brand's new book, who is one of the sort of founders of the Long Now Foundation. I'd encourage people to check it out.
maintenance.
Yeah, just Google Stuart Brand maintenance. Also check out, there's an incredible documentary, I think Stripe Press actually funded,
Oh, really?
called like We Are As Gods or something. And it's Stuart Brand. It turns out it's one of these characters who is kind of at the center of like 5 or 6 different technological revolutions, going back to like the Grateful Dead and psychedelics and the first computers and the first internet stuff. And he did the whole Earth catalog and all these amazing things. He was an inspiration to Steve Jobs. So, we talked about Palantir earlier. Like, I think it's cool to study the contemporary examples, but also go back to like what inspired Alex Karp and the founders of Palantir to build the way they did. Study Apple, but also study like who influenced Steve Jobs. That's a cool way to learn. And if you want to build something, because the next thing, you're not going to get it just by copying whoever's popular now. You kind of have to build on the foundations of what influenced them and then create something new on top of it.
Yeah. Maybe we'll end. I just have one last question. Do you have any favorite classical thinkers?
We mentioned John Rawls earlier and John Stuart Mill, utilitarianism. I love studying economic thinkers, so Friedrich Hayek, Adam Smith, and then more contemporary, folks like a Richard Feynman or a Tyler Cohen. I think we'll look back as like super influential and super amazing. So yeah, I'd say of living folks, Tyler Cohen would be one of the best to follow. He has blogged like almost every day for the past like 20 something years. Powered by WordPress, blog's called Marginal Revolutions. And I guarantee if you read it, you will get smarter. So check it out.
I do know of him, and I follow his kind of sphere, but I didn't realize that he blogs every single day. That's crazy. I know he does this. He does kind of a media grant program. I know a couple people that he's given money to like just work on kind of a artistic creative pursuit that maybe it's a commercial project, maybe it's not, but it's just they want to create something and put it in the world. And he just kind of, I think he just gives grants and there's like no strings attached. It's like, here's $100,000 and just blog or make videos for a year and see what happens. So
there was a great profile of him in 1842, the Economist's magazine. Sort of a long form profile just came out a few weeks ago, and he's definitely a polymath. There's a lot of folks like that. It's also interesting how many are prolific bloggers. So like a Seth Godin, who also has like a multi-year publishing streak. Some of the greatest thinkers get that way by sharing their ideas, not like staying in a cave and working for 40 years. It's all about that engagement that sort of helps it grow.
Well, this has been an awesome conversation. Thanks for taking the time to chat.
It's been a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to hanging out in the future.
And thank you for listening. And thanks to Ramp for saving us all time and money. Head to ramp.com/thepeel to get $250 on your first corporate card. If you missed it, make sure to check out last week's episode with Grant Lee at Gamma and how they grew to 50 million in ARR with only 30 employees. Tune in over the next few weeks for conversations with Garrett Lord, the founder of Handshake, the college recruiting platform that's emerged as a leader filling the massive opportunity in AI data labeling, and Owen McCabe on Intercom's impressive turnaround from SaaS to AI native customer service platform. If you don't want to miss any of these, subscribe to my newsletter, The Split, in the description to get each episode plus a transcript emailed directly to your inbox every week. And finally, if you like this episode, please leave a quick review or comment wherever you're listening or watching, and let me know if you have any feedback or thoughts on this or any other episode. Thanks again for listening. See you in the next episode.